Hi, it's Mark Coopersmith. And in my ongoing conversation with innovation and entrepreneurial leaders, it's really a pleasure for me to spend some time with Hans Kespohl, who is the head of business model innovation at Covestro. Hans, how are you?
Well, I'm pretty well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's morning here in California. It's evening in Cologne, Germany, where we're catching Hans. The sun never sets on our Zoom world these days. It was a pleasure for me to meet Hans when he was at UC Berkeley for some programs that we were running about 3 years ago. Is that right, Hans?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I
and
recall this time, yeah.
we reconnected recently. I will say, for me, when I reconnected with Hans and I looked at his title again, Head of Business Model Innovation, I said, what an amazing job. What do you do? And that's what we want to focus on here, especially what do you do at a company like Covestro? So, um, Hans, just share with us a little bit about your role, your company, how you got there, and then we'll kind of morph that into what do you do and how do you do it? How do you drive business model innovation? Please.
Okay, thank you, and thanks you, thanks a lot for having me. It's really a pleasure to kind of reflect what I'm doing and giving me the opportunity here. And actually, there are not so many people that really like my title and my position. So yeah,
I think it's
let's.
fantastic. I mean, I looked at that. It's like you get to tinker with kind of the underlying elements of how we create value.
Yeah, absolutely. But I will come to that in a minute, and let's see if it's only fun or if there's some real serious stuff in it as
And
well.
maybe a little politics involved as well internally, right?
Oh, it could be. It could
Yeah,
be.
there could
Yes,
be.
absolutely. Okay, so yeah, I'm now 6 years with Covestro. Not from day one in this position. Before I got that, and I got this position in 2016, so 4 years ago. I was responsible for insight and foresight management at Covestro, which was at that time still Bayer. So Bayer Material Science was one of the division of the Bayer company. You probably all know the most famous product of Bayer is aspirin from the pharmaceutical business. Now we had 4 years ago the chance to spun out of the enterprise, became a new separated business, which is now called Covestro.
And
And
give us a little bit of kind of, core areas of business. And I know you were probably going to go there, size of the entity.
yeah, so Covestro is around 14 billion euro turnover. We have 80,000, 18, not 80, 18,000 employees around the world, equally spread, I would say, around the big regions of Europe, Asia, and the Americas. A global company producing high-tech polymers, polyurethane and polycarbonates for many, many different applications. We're serving industries from automotive, construction, electronics. It goes into leisure products in sports, for example, in medical devices. So many, many different applications for these kind
So
of
basically, you're the
materials.
building blocks for a lot of, or one of the key building blocks for a lot
Yeah.
of products that we use every day, from consumer to industrial.
Most likely you're using it right now, but you don't know. For
Right?
example, sitting on it, on the foam of your chair, or maybe it's part of the adhesives that is necessary to build your desk. So many things typically we use day by day, but we are not aware where
Right.
all these products come from.
Well, it's a 40 billion euro turnover company, so it touches an awful lot of people and products.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And with the start of Covestro, I got the opportunity that we a little bit of reorganized some of the functions. You can imagine being still one of the major divisions of Bayer. There was lots of corporate functions available for each and every division. We had to build all these things up, and we started at that time a complete new department, the corporate innovation department. And within that department, I'm heading business model innovation. So I'm the first one who was assigned to this completely new kind of job. And yeah, it's really a pleasure to do
Now,
this because
how do you get that job? You were actually involved in kind of trying to forecast what comes next prior to that, right? Futurist, future oriented.
yeah,
But how do you
yeah.
migrate into what qualifies you to be the business model innovation head? And what do they look for in your background?
Well, most likely they were looking for not so tight with the core business, and had a fresh view on
Right.
how the change that is happening around such a company could be used in order to, let's say, change a little bit the course or change the portfolio of businesses a company like Covestro is doing.
Yeah. Well,
And before
what I thought was fascinating too was your focus on the future in your prior role, right? Because as future uses of products change, and of course, as an ingredient company, you really have to look at that. As trade flows change, the business models will change too. So I think for me, it's a really natural migration because you're focused on kind of looking around the corner for what's next. And I think the business models will have to shift as business practices shift. Well,
yeah
I'm curious. We'll see. That's my hypothesis. We'll see if that gets borne out in our conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is the logic behind it. And I had over a decade experience in consultancy businesses and in strategy development and innovation management. So I had the opportunity to see lots of different businesses and industries, which some of them are the target industries of a material supplier like Covestro. So it gave me a little bit of a head start at these times to know what is happening down the value chains and what kind of change we could anticipate and how to react to it. So
Right.
that was one of the reasons why I took over the foresight position. But in the foresight position, I felt it's fairly difficult to leverage the knowledge you have into real projects. And I think this is one of the key insights when you do innovation in a big organization, that you have not only, let's say, the air coverage, you talk about things, but where you have the possibilities, have people and budgets that you really can do something and show what tangible outcomes can be achieved when you go into new routes.
So share with us, so you're in this new role. We know that business models will shift. The way that we create value for our partners and our customers will change. The way we generate revenues will change. But in your role, can you share with us an example or two of whether it's at a high anonymized level or a more specific level of kind of how you approach this in an internal or some type of a case study?
Yeah. When we started this new function, I was alone. I had no employees, no team, nothing. So I was sitting together with my boss, and we were thinking about, okay, what can we do? What can we really do? I mean, we could start now doing the roadshow, doing speeches, using PowerPoint back and forth. We said, well, most likely we have to educate a few people about this approach because it was not very common in our company. But we were convinced from the early days on that this is probably, let's say, not the best story to show what business model innovation is capable of. So we were thinking about, okay, where do we have a kind of safe bet in our business that we could take as a first real project and a real experiment. And one of these first things was it was a digital venture. We started from these early days, and it was about digital commerce. I recall personally when, let's say 22 years back at the end of the 90s, when I did my first experience as a startup entrepreneur in the e-commerce sphere, like trying to sell shoes via the internet. What a weird idea at the end of the 90s. Today we know this is has become reality, but kind of a similar thing was the digital commerce perspective to the chemical industry. A B2B industry, only a few manufacturers having big customers. So typically the sell side from the manufacturer is key account management, is personal relationships to the buying centers on the customer side. So they simply pick up the phone, they call each other, and they only used so far e-commerce in the sense of automizing the transactions between the customers and the suppliers. But all the negotiation part, that was done face-to-face by human beings. And our simple idea at that time was, well, maybe the customers change preferences and would love to have a faster and easier way in order to see what could be an attractive market price. Is volumes available currently, or is the supplier not being able to ship something? So this basic initial idea was really having something like a spot channel for us as a manufacturer to sell the rest of material, for example, at the end of the month, and bring this in an easy way, let's say in an afternoon, into the market without big hassles of, well, my typical customer is on holiday and I can't reach him, and so on and so on. So that was the basic idea. And
so
what we did then,
basically a small kind of excess inventory marketplace that's online, immediately visible, transactions could take place in real time. Is that right?
yeah, but the way how we did it was a bit special, and it was very much, let's say, in the context of our industry and how typically negotiations are being done, and what the routines are there, and that is what we wanted to offer, a digital way how to do that.
Right. And how did that work?
Well, a couple of years later, we have an own entity in Amsterdam. It's an own unit. I have the product is now a digital deal-making tool. So it's not an open marketplace that we are offering there, but it is something like for private, let's say, one-to-one channels in an industry like ours. That is where it has to perform, and it is kind of a platform approach, but because for that company they have to adapt it to two sides: the sellers of materials or chemicals, and the way how they can bring promotions into the market, how they can use the different functions, how to build a price, how to inform customers about volumes, and so on and so on. While on the other hand, it needs to be, of course, incorporated for the customers very smoothly into a couple of systems, different legacy systems where transactions need to be followed and need to go through ERP systems, and so on and so on. So it sits a little bit on top of that. This is where this group currently is working on. So we had the first of all, we did it the classical Silicon Valley way. We had a deep dive into the problem space in a co-creation manner with customers. We did wireframes and mock-ups and prototyping overnight to see whether we understood the customers in the right way. Then we built an MVP with faking the complete back-end integration. Perfect. So this was done manually.
Exactly. Fake it before you can make it. Yep.
Yeah, because we simply we were not sure at that time whether customers would really recurringly buy through this channel, and if it really makes sense to invest some millions to do all this automation work.
Is it only your products? Is it only your products, or are other products also available to be sold on that marketplace?
Yeah, it is open for other companies because we learned pretty soon from customers that the buying basket is, of course, a bit more than just our products. Right. and they were asking for, okay, what is the additional offering here? But we wanted to be careful not to position this as a new kind of typical marketplace for buying chemicals. We stuck to the business model idea, saying, no, this is a software product, and this software product enables customers to do this, let's say, in the marketing and the selling down to the segment of one, instead of, window dressing it nicely, putting your products in, making a promotion price there, and everybody in the market can see that. Usually that is not true for B2B chemical business. So you have to.
Is that now a revenue? Is that now a revenue producing piece of software for Covestro?
Yeah, we are, I would say, right, and it does produce revenues for us. We're using it heavily, so we're even in the MVP testing phase, we want to make sure that these were real deals. So yeah, we had to have all business operations in place, although they, let's say, at first hand, they were not in favor of it because it was kind of exception handling right, where we came up with, and we were more kind of interfering with the traditional streamlined processes we have in our core businesses.
Yeah, exactly.
So here this is the first hint where it's getting difficult.
Let me recap, if I could, in a little bit. First of all, this was a problem that you were facing inside your business. So one of the things that I love about this is that as opposed to brainstorming around where can we go, to begin with, you focused on a real problem that you were facing, that some of your business managers were facing inside the business. And then you went through, as you said, the typical entrepreneurial process. You went out and you co-created, you talked to your customers, you went through, as we call it, right, the customer discovery process. What's your problem? How are you solving it now? Then you did some prototyping. You came out with that minimum viable product, that MVP. You faked it up a little bit. The back end wasn't entirely there, which is exactly the way to do it, to see if there's adoption. You found the adoption, and then you ended up building the product around that, and you iterated on it based on how the market responded. That's kind of what I heard. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
maybe
classic.
I can.
That's classic and classical. That's the way to do, right? So let me say one thing before handing it back to you. One of the things that I really love, especially in a new role like this, there are two things that you said. One is you were all alone. It was you and your boss, and that's the way these exciting new jobs start, right? You look around and you say, "Where's my team?" And you have to look in the mirror to see your team member. So that's the first thing. But then it was a matter of, as opposed to educating in the hypothetical, you said, let's go tackle a big problem. And you tackled a problem, you solved some problems, and then you got a small win out of it to begin with. And John Cotter out of Harvard, who I happen to really like his work on leadership, says the value of small wins, kind of frequently communicated, is an amazing enabler of change, because people can look at that and say, oh, we didn't expect Hans to actually deliver necessarily that win in this way. There's a benefit. Next time Hans comes around, I want to understand what he's doing, because there may be some benefits for me. So I love the way you tackled this with the approach of, let's launch something entrepreneurial style, let's get a win under our belt, or if not, we'll learn from it. We'll go from there. So I just kind of wanted to frame your case study within some of the frameworks or the approaches that we look at it, and it fit, amazingly well. And as you say, it's ongoing, it's doing well.
Yeah, and I would say it still has to prove the success of the original idea, definitely. And I think this is one of the insights if you do business model innovation. First of all, it takes some time. So there might be changes, there might be lots of obstacles. But what we definitely saw is it is very important for a legacy organization like our chemical company is, with its traditional sales functions, traditional supply chain centers, and lots of people are involved in doing these daily businesses. For them, it very often felt like, okay, it is just a new software. And with this software, I just install it and I run it, and then I'm successful. And I was taking back in 3-4 years ago, I was taking a bunch of senior leaders from Covestro to the Valley,
Right.
because I was convinced that this would be the wrong understanding. If you treat a new business model for a company like a typical off-the-shelf software product, you buy, you maybe customize a little bit and you install it, and then simply you try to do it in the same way you did it before, maybe a bit more efficient, let's say 20% less time, you know, or effort you would use for the same results. This is innovation, of course, but that's not business model innovation.
Right, right.
And here we had a tough task, because what I learned, sorry for that, with your colleagues at Stanford, it was that it is so important not just to make it right, let's say from the theoretical perspective, but to make it happen and work in a contextual environment.
Right.
And this contextual environment was so important, and that is what I learned at Stanford with Larry Leifer from the D School, is that this is so important. And being back home or being back in my company, I was trying to tell again and again, you have something that is much mightier than you think in your hands now, but you have to learn how to use it in a proper way, depending on market situation, depending on what happened to your customers recently, and many other influence factors. And if you just play it like a standard playbook, you will probably fail, and you will return to your old habit, picking up the phone and calling your customer.
Right. So it's funny, it's like you have great power, use it wisely, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you mentioned a couple of things in there. You mentioned that you did some work with Stanford in the D School, the design school. And that's focused on a very much a customer-centric model. So you talk about contextualizing that, customer centricity, those types of things. Are there any particular tools that you use as you think about this, the entrepreneurial tool? Now, some people might say, oh, business model innovation, let's look at the business model canvas by Osterwalder, or the business model navigator by Gassman. And maybe those helped influence or provided some frameworks, or maybe you used them extensively, where you said, we're really just going to go talk to all of our key stakeholders and understand. What kind of frameworks did you use? What advice do you give to others that are starting the same journey?
Mm-hmm. I think one of a mature set of frameworks, methodology wise, is definitely design thinking. That is something, if you want to really deep dive into the problem space and you want to generate lots of ideas, you know, this double funnel approach that is behind that, I think that is very, very helpful. Right. Usually what I encounter is we have lots of ideas and we have lots of opinions. But when we try to ask, or when we want to understand what is the problem that you're trying to solve, then it very often becomes relatively thin. Right. And people are not aware how many assumptions they have. It's not explicit for them. They just think it is like it is. Right. And not more. They never had the task or the chance to dig deeper. And this is why I love the design thinking, for example, so much, or even Alex Osterwalder's work on value proposition canvas and the design of it. I think these are very mature tools and very helpful, very practical ones, easy ones to use and to facilitate in workshops internally, as well as, of course, externally, together with customers and users.
Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting about that is exactly what you just shared, and that is the ideas that we have, wouldn't this be a great idea if, are all based typically on an entire set of assumptions that we frequently haven't tested. A lot of those may be gut. So for me, the benefit of some of these tools isn't that they aren't the only way to approach it, but they help us really look inside those ideas and say, what are the underlying assumptions? And then we can say, how do we go test those in the marketplace? So for me, that's one of those key elements. It's not just the idea, you've got to get underneath. That's where your customer discovery and your market facing activities are really so important.
Yeah. Absolutely agree. And I think an additional benefit comes with it visualizes and structures a lot about these discussions you have anyway. And I experienced with especially my consultancy times how important the visualization of concepts are if you want to discuss them in a diverse group, if you want to get different perspectives and views into it. And I think this is one of the important roles. If you want to do business model innovation, you have to have, let's say, a couple of skills that helps you to do the conceptual work.
And
And that
would
is
those be?
so
What are some of
important.
the fluencies, the particular fluencies that you would think you want to bring to it in your team?
Well, like I said, you need to have a good understanding and experience in using tools like design thinking, like even the business model frameworks you were just referring to. But also, for example, one thing that is very helpful is that goes under service design.
Mm-hmm.
So having this mentality to really step into the shoes of somebody who who is doing a job with all the gains and pains, and how can you improve this situation. I think that is something that is very, very important if you want to understand two things. One is you want to better understand where you can help. And the second is you want to do something that really matters to the users and the customers. Because if you do not distill this thing, or if you cannot find it, you will never ever end up with a new business model.
So is the idea to try and pick up just a few extra basis points in profit? Or is the idea with this to try and actually create some meaningful changes, some meaningful benefits to it? And I guess the way I framed it, it's kind of a self-proclaimed answer on that, right? But go ahead.
Yeah, we positioned our business model innovation as something that could be applicable for the core business, but it also should look, let's see, into adjacencies around it.
Yep.
But of course, these needs to be somehow not be just out of the core and simply new opportunities. They should somehow, of course, leverage the capabilities our company has. Although Covestro is only 5 years young, it's not a real startup. It's an 80 years old company with lots of history, and so it has a pretty dominant core business and a pretty dominant business model itself, and it is relatively successful. So it is not the situation like in other industries where they are kind of in a defending position where they need to reinvent themselves. I think that is not exactly what we are in. We want to seize the new opportunities that are coming up just by changes in our target industries or by changes that comes from digitalization, the big digital transformation.
Yep.
Lots of opportunities, and nowadays or recently changes that goes or are driven by sustainability or circular economy. Just to name these big trends that are affecting our strategies. And so it's not so much about, that we have the financials, we have them in mind, but it's not the priority why we how we decide and what we do.
So the example that you gave was adjacent to your core business. It was helping grow the core business, but it was in an area that wasn't necessarily core, which is really a great place to start to show the power of what you're doing. But then as you look at your core business, for example, one of the things that I'll always say is, well, if it's a product, can it be turned into a service? If it's a service, can it be turned into a product? Look at what the software company has done, shifting from selling software to software as a service. You might even see that in transportation. Instead of buying a car, as with Uber or Lyft or others, it's transportation as a service. So as you look at your core business and we look at major shifts, where are you seeing business model innovation take place there? What are some of the the initiatives you're looking at, and then the next question when we come back is, what are some of the challenges you've encountered, so that we can learn from some of those as well.
Mm. I would say there is one challenge we have, and maybe it's a bit homemade, that our customers are used to, we sell a product at a certain price, and that's it. And that's of course not all, as you can imagine. If you do material science,
Right.
there is not only the opportunities how you can tweak and twist the material characteristics and properties. This is one aspect. The other one is how do you process these materials and build parts out of that. So there's lots of engineering know-how and knowledge that goes with it. But basically, our business model is we sell products at volumes of tons, kilotons, for example, and each kilogram costs so much amount of US dollars or euros. And
but a lot of
most of it is factored in.
Yeah, but commodities change prices too, right? I mean, look at the way oil fluctuates, and that can be an input too. So how does that change for you?
Yeah. I was just referring to the situation that this has been kind of the industry standard, and
right.
industry is used to it a lot.
Yeah.
Now we have it is for this industry. It's fairly new that we now think about to sell a service to them, because usually they say, well, you are our raw material supplier, and can you? I mean, it is like you talk about a big contract, and then you start negotiating that you want to have 10 euros more for each mile that you are traveling. Come on, guys, wipe that away, yeah? And let's talk about the big chunk and not about these teeny tiny items in the invoice. And I think this is what the difficulty we are encountering, and maybe other industries have similar issues. So there is a common standard, which is very dominant. Everyone is used to it. And now we're trying to step out of it. So one of the insights we learned from that is we need to separate this new services from our material core business, because usually our customers don't differentiate between these two value propositions. They say, well, in the long run, it's the same, and I will stick to the one I'm used to. And that gives us lots of difficulties if we want to, for example, implement new digital services. We're currently working on one of these ventures that is now in launch phase, that goes into the market. And what we learn from customers, they say, well, you can do this, let's say, for the first year, but if you want to, let's say, continuously supply us with these new services, this shouldn't be Covestro anymore.
Yeah.
So
here so are you thinking about different brands now that's integrating if you're also dealing with changes in business?
Yeah, it could be different brands, it could be separated businesses. So it needs to be clear that there is no, let's say, conflict between selling your traditional products in big volumes, while on the other hand, trying to capitalize on new digital services.
Right.
So it is really difficult in our situation. And again, the context, we need to pay attention to the context where our customers are in and what they are used to. Because if they are not convinced, or if they have any doubts, or if they don't trust us, we won't be successful.
Yeah.
I mean, even if we think we would be, because it looks like a smart solution. But customers might have a different opinion on that.
Right, exactly. It's no matter what you think, what ultimately matters
doesn't matter
is how the customers perceive it. All right, I have 3 questions as we wrap up. Now we'll take a few minutes on each one of them. Number 1, if you were to share with others who are embarking upon this journey some lessons learned, maybe some potholes in the road of business model innovation, some things to look out for, what are 1 or 2 that come to mind from your experiences along the way that you would say, if I knew now if I knew then what I know now, here's what I might have done differently. And over my shoulder, I have a copy of my book, The Other F Word, right? Putting failures to work. So so I always have to ask this question.
So I would answer like this, that I think there are two important lessons we learned. I mean, we started with doing real experiments in order to show what's behind this this new approach. You have to find out if your company has any kind of experiences. How is this new kind of innovation approach be seen? We had, for example, a strong tendency in our company that innovation was equal to chemical R&D. And there was not the mindset around me that said, well, what do you mean by a business model innovation?
Right.
And then it turned out, this is what one of the second things is, well, you can do experiments in a lab, in a chemical lab, for example, but you can't experiment with customers. Customers are expecting a 100% working solution. And before you go to customers, you have to convince the internal, let's say, doorman, yeah,
Right. Your internal
like
stakeholders,
sales,
right?
like key accounters. They say, no, don't mess with my customer.
Yeah. Right.
I need to be convinced first, and then we got stuck in this opinion discussion. Yeah, and I think this is something that could be completely different in a different industry, in a different company. So for somebody who wants to do kind of the same exercises, look out for what does your organization know? How is business model innovation seen? What is the attitude? What is the experience? And that helps a lot.
Yeah, no, super important. Which, in fact, in some of the corporate entrepreneurship work that I do, including some of the workshops and things that we run at UC Berkeley and that I do, we have an entire segment on managing stakeholders and your stakeholder dashboard and figuring out that dichotomy of influence and where they sit vis-a-vis your initiative. Are they benefiting? Might they be hurt by it? So really mapping your stakeholders is hugely important, and then communicating with them appropriately, also really important. So thanks for that. All right, question 2 out of my 3. You're a big startup. You're a huge startup, or you were a number of years ago as you spun out. But you compete, including with new business models, with lots and lots of real startups. One's coming out of Silicon Valley, one's coming out of Asia, one's coming out of Europe, kind of in all of your markets. And that's with new products and new business models and new approaches to the marketplace. How do you incorporate all of these new entrants and the way that they're doing things into your business model innovation thinking? Right? And part of that is, do you want to get there before them? Do you look at those and do you move quickly for those that stick? How do you look at startups in that way? And what's your strategy?
Well, a startup, first of all, is probably simply not of the same size as these typical industry incumbents.
Right. Exactly.
And in our industries, they're
yeah.
Although sometimes they scale quickly and they get high evaluations and all of that. However, in the chemicals business, there is lots of investment necessary, and it goes relatively slow that you develop something new in the lab, a new molecule, a new polymer, and bring that then from a lab scale of 1-2 kilograms into something where you can make a business out of it. So talking about tons of materials.
Right.
So usually this process simply takes up to 10-20 years.
So there's big barriers to entry.
So it is a bit of the nature of innovation in the chemicals. It takes quite a while. However, the startups have one wonderful thing: they don't have any legacy. They can act very quickly. They don't have to transform a culture, transform processes within big corporations, and thus it is very interesting to work together with them. However, the relationship between an established corporate and a startup could be manifold. It could be our supplier, it could be our customer in the future, it could be a technology partner. We might need him to enter new businesses. So we have to look at startups not in a general way, but in a very special one, case by case. So we don't have, for example, a big corporate venturing program because we said we are not interested in simply investing into startups. We just want to see whether if we have a fit, we decide about what type of corporations we are willing to do, whether it's just, you know, a commercial relationship or whether it's going to be all the way down till a merger. This has been, I would say, a longer process in our company. As I said, spun out of Bayer, where all these functions were available. We need to build them up again, and we need to find our own way. And multiple ways, but we do work together with startups. And when I reflected a bit on what we do here today here in this conversation, I saw that initially I had the idea to work more intensively with accelerators. Yeah, like the big ones, Y Combinator, Plug and Play, Mass Challenge, and so on.
Right.
And actually,
Skydeck. We just had our demo yesterday, actually, and we had 30 companies present, which is great. Yeah. So if you work with accelerators, you get to at least see many different companies, leadership teams, concepts, right?
Yeah. So we are not engaged with all of them, of course. We picked some of them, but we play many different tools in order to stay connected to the different ecosystems, and that's all around the world. I mean, in China, this is very interesting how fast these ecosystems are developing, and we want to be part of that with open innovation. Yeah.
So what's really interesting is a lot of corporates kind of have this we'd like to work with startups and work like startups. And you've incorporated both of those really in your approach to innovation. So, all right, last question. It's a little bit of a multi-part question. When we were sharing some thoughts earlier, you said, well, you kind of have this 5-step process. And let me see if I captured them right for you in your kind of progression in this role and how, and kind of your advice. And it was, number 1 was walk, not talk. Number 2 was share and learn. 3 was build competencies. 4, let others shine. And 5, protect against doubts. That was kind of the maturity model that you shared that you had gone through. Can you share just a little bit of we've touched on a lot of that, but can you share a bit on that progression for others who are involved in this either from the inside or are looking at how it works, how that's worked with you and Covestro?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I try to summarize it because it was a journey. It was a journey of the last 4 years when I wrote down these 5 phases. I think we touched upon walk, not talk at the beginning of our conversation. Do things. The only way to do it is to do it. I think this is one of the famous quotes we have to keep in mind, and the only thing that really counts in a big organization. Do something tangible where people see what you are capable of with your approach. Share and learn. I think this was very important to have the senior leaders as very important stakeholders on your side because they can make or break any customer relationship you want to go to. Saying, well, this is my business, stay out of here. And then I have a huge problem because I simply cannot go to the market where I want to go. Build competencies was the phase when we said, well, we started a lot working in the beginning with external company builders, for example, agencies, consultancies, and so on, because we were simply lacking of these competencies at scale.
Right.
But we learned pretty fast that it definitely would make sense to have, let's say, kind of a basis of these new skills internally, and these are now teams like business model innovation is a team of mine, or digital solutions labs where I run these teams. Let others shine was the 4th phase, and this one was particularly important because we are a headquarter department, and sometimes the rumor goes in big organizations, well, the headquarters has resources enough and they can do what they want. And the
Right.
businesses, you know, they are always kept short. So we wanted to participate that all of the organization, everyone and everywhere can do business model innovation if he has a great idea. And so we started an internal so-called startup challenge. And each year a team won and got a year free from current duties, and they got €1 million in order simply to experiment and to drive their venture forward. Last but not least, protect against doubts. Well, I said earlier, the context is so important. And this is not only true for the internal questions or the customer situation, it's true for the whole industry. We started 2016 when we had very good economical times and one record year after the other. Now we have a downturn even before the COVID crisis came on top of that. So currently we are flipping the coin 2 times before we think about how to spend it. That means we need to protect against doubts, especially in terms of the patience. Right. Of the board of management, for example, expecting, of course, now to deliver something, while, you know, the nature of building a new business is a bit of a different one than just repeating what you have done several times before.
Well, that works for a while, but eventually it doesn't anymore.
Exactly. And I think this is, let's say, to sum it up, my last comment, that is the difference between the manager and the entrepreneur. The manager repeats things maybe to reach a certain goal with given resources in the best way. The entrepreneur sees, what can I do out of my situation to create more options, and how can I create from these options more value and more business? And this doesn't follow the same logic. And I think this is what a company, if it's big, if it's old, really need to learn. They started as a startup 80 or 100 years ago, like the entrepreneurs and serial founders these days do it. But right now they are huge and big, and they adapted the way how to run a business, and they are far away from acting like a startup. This is what I learned in my last 4 years being head of business model innovation.
I love the model. I love the comments. It's certainly true here in Silicon Valley too. I mean, companies that we think is great innovators, the Apples and Googles and Facebooks and LinkedIn's of the world, they're not startups anymore. They're huge organizations, and the culture does shift as well, yet you have to keep innovating. Hans, thank you for this broad-ranging conversation. Thanks for sharing your model too, kind of how your journey, but also insights. I love the way that you migrate from just starting out and doing into here's how we think about and make decisions, because that's a huge change. It's been a pleasure. Looking forward to continuing the conversation again.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thanks so much for having me. Have a great day.